Before we get to the serious stuff, Jean-François, I got to say, I had a chance to speak to Eric Duhem earlier this afternoon, and we're going to replay that interview at about 5:30 on this letter to Luc Robitaille, which I know you know about. I gave him kudos because, as I said, I think every other opposition leader in Quebec wishes they would have thought of that first. What did you think?
I on Twitter, I said, great letter. And Eric Duhem was glad to have a former PQ leader applaud his initiative because, basically, I mean, this Luc Robitaille guy was here for the announcement of the King coming to play for $5 to $7 million. And then he turned around and got a call from Salt Lake City and said, okay, we'll do it for free. So, I mean, everyone should be writing to him, and not only, as you say, all opposition leaders, but Éric Girard himself saying, okay, well, can we reconsider this? Can we, because now everybody looks foolish, including the King. The Kings look like they're milking one of the partners and not the others, so it's a good deal for them, but it's not reputationally, it's not great. So I wish we'll have some reaction from Robitaille and see what he thinks of the whole thing.
So if you were a betting man, do you think there'll be any reaction?
I think the reaction now from the Prime Minister's office, the Premier's office, would be either you do it for free or we pay the kill fee and we stop this. Because from their perspective, the only question that remains is how many weeks of political damage do we want to have this issue hammering at us until they come to play next fall and it's going to start again. So it's a net loss politically for the CAQ, and they should cut their losses.
Okay, well, that'd be interesting to see if that actually happens. So far, all we know, Eric Duhem said he knows from a friend that Luc Robitaille has seen the letter, but there's been no response back so far.
And it's not, politically, it's not for Robitaille to answer the leader of the fifth or the fourth opposition party.
Fair enough.
He can send an RSVP, but it's not supposed to be his interlocutor.
Yeah, he should have got, of course, Eric Girard to do a CC on the bottom of the letter. That would have been good. He would have had a copy that way.
Yeah.
Let me move on and talk about a story that we talked about earlier on. This is a new part of Bill 96 that yesterday or the day before, Jean-François Roberge was talking about the idea that now appliances that will be sold here will have to be, this is just draft legislation I understand in the bill, with original French on them. In other words, if you buy a stove and the instructions on the stove are in English, apparently it's not good enough to have a template, a sticker of some kind that would have the French directions on them put on that stove. It would have to come originally that way from the manufacturer. So I have two questions. Number one, is that how you understand this? And number two is what you think of the idea.
Well, that's how I understand the draft regulation. So a draft regulation is tabled. People have 45 days to propose modifications. And so I'm sure that manufacturers will say, well, it's not as though, the onus is on them to say, well, we're shipping, let's say, 5% of our production to Quebec, and it's much too cumbersome to customize 5,000 items for Quebec. And we're going to lose money if we do this. Of course, it's the first reaction of the lawyer saying we don't want to do that. That's what they said for everything else, including having American movies and their French versions on the day they opened in North America. They said it couldn't be done. And then having the Microsoft programs in French at the same time as the English, they said it couldn't be done. So the first reaction is it can't be done. All right. So now that you said that, can you do it? And so that's I'm looking to see how impossible this is, and if their reaction is say, okay, it's going to cost $15 more per fridge if we do that. Well, go ahead.
But at the end of the day, isn't that shooting yourself a bit in the foot if manufacturers said that it's going to cost more? You're not asking them to absorb the cost. They'll simply pass that on to the consumer.
Yeah, and they'll have other manufacturers that say, well, we don't have this crest emblazoned on our thing, so we're going to be cheaper and we're going to take your customers. So that's the beauty of competition.
Okay, so you're saying, but then again, if it's a matter of other companies, look, we could discuss this, I guess, back and forth. It seems to me for a big manufacturer who would have to set up a separate production line to fulfill the Quebec request, the extra cost, whatever that would be, and I imagine it'd be substantial, at least at the beginning, but economies of scale would suggest if they don't want to do that, then smaller companies who would pick up that business would be charging you more money because they don't have those economies of scale to begin with.
Well, those are all hypotheses. Okay, so we have manufacturers that do customize for a number of reasons and a number of colors and a number of different doors, and it's not beyond our technological ability to have two different crests. And maybe they'll decide to have a Spanish crest for the Mexican market, and we'll see. I think if the argument can be made to the department that this is really impossible, then they will, I wish, that's what I would do. I would wait for a compelling case to make a change in the draft regulation.
Oh, and who would, okay, so explain how that would work, because yes, it's just a draft regulation, and it's going to be, you said 45 days. Will people have a chance to weigh in on this?
Yep.
And then at that point, they'll decide what the government will simply decide on its own what it wants to do.
Well, it has the decisions, the government, but they can extend the period. They can extend the period for
right.
Because the draft legislation is pretty wide in terms of application. They can decide that for embedded brand, they will have further regulation next year. After
okay,
if you do this intelligently, of course, you should not take no for an answer because the first answer is always no.
Okay.
But then you discuss intelligently of what can be done and how soon can it be done.
Speaking of intelligently, what did you make of Jean-François Lisée when asked the question and he said, no, stickers would be okay. Like templates that come with these in English or French, whatever, those would be fine as long as the French ones were on. He either never read the bill or didn't understand this draft legislation. What the hell was that about?
I haven't heard that, but he should be well prepared, especially when you're talking to Anglo reporters. You have to be very well prepared and go into every line and every subsection of any regulation you put forth.
I mentioned earlier today, this came up in a Canadian press story yesterday. It's not really been picked up in French media. From what you've seen today, is this even a story in French media?
I haven't seen this yet.
Okay. Last thing I will ask you before we run out of time today, the other request here, or beyond a request, now we have a different minister suggesting that Netflix, Spotify, etc., better, I guess force might be the right word, forcing them to include more French content, and I'm guessing this is Quebec-produced content, or risk not being able to have their service here. So Netflix, Spotify, what do you think of that?
Well, the report was tabled about 3 weeks ago. It's francophone content because they believe that Quebec content was not wide enough to make a dent. And the first concept is they call it découvrabilité. So how can you discover when you go on these platforms the French and the Quebec content? If you have to go in the search module to find it, well, that's not good enough because they want to make sure that if you're in Quebec and unless you opt out of that, you will be shown on the front page options of French content. And then you can wipe it out if you wish, but that would be the default position. I haven't seen yet a law or a regulation on how they will go doing that. But as you know, in radio, quotas of French and Canadian content do exist in television as well. So that's the extension of that to these new venues.
Okay. We had, I'm trying to think, earlier in the show, we actually had Benoit Pelletier talking about this and suggesting that a company as big as Netflix, a global company, when presented with something like this, might simply decide to say no and just, you know what, if you don't want us here, that's fine, we won't be here.
Well, that's, again, I don't know why he says that, because back when Gérald Godin told the majors in Hollywood that they wanted the French version of the movie the same day, Jack Valenti, which is not known for his delicacy, said then we'll boycott Quebec and you won't have the second installment of Star Wars. That was the threat. And then they worked out that in the pre-production and post-production period, there was no big difficulty in doing this, and they did this, and American movies grew their market share in Quebec. So,
First answer always no, to get back to your previous point.
Yeah.
Okay. Jean-François, thank you. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week.